ProWrestlingTees.com/616entertainment is now live if you'd like to grab your own official 616 t-shirt. Or if you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, you can do so like the beautiful producers you see before you. None of this happens without your support, and I love you so much. Now let's get to it. Survival horror. Today, these words send a shiver down the spine of gamers around the world. Our hearts and minds light up, digging deep into our childhood memories filled with rivers of blood, guttural screams, and a deathly fear of the dark. Our palms sweat at the mere thought of coming face to face with our first zombie inside that colossal mansion hidden in the forest of the Arklay Mountains. Our subconscious projects visions of walking the streets of Silent Hill to the forefront, wishing, hoping, and praying that whatever horrible creatures we fear may be looming in the fog aren't really there. Intrusive thoughts of being trapped in the cold, black void of dead space force the heart to pound even harder, knowing that a gruesome death could be hiding around each and every corner. If you grew up in the 90s, like I did, then you know all too well. These are thoughts and feelings that stick with you. But while these were the origins of fear for many of us 20 and 30-somethings, this isn't where survival horror truly began. To find the root of this evil, as it were, we must turn the clocks all the way back to the tail end of the 1980s. But before we go digging up the coffin that houses the origins of survival horror, let me first introduce you to this brand new series. Much like my history of retrospectives in the past on the WCW video games, Mortal Kombat, and the WWE SmackDown series, we're going to spend the next several months on this channel digging into what is without a doubt the biggest survival horror franchise of all time. So I hope you've got your lockpick, your first aid spray, and your ink ribbons ready, Dan-Dans, because this is only the beginning. Welcome to the history of Resident Evil. Despite being centered around the undead, the series that debuted in 1996 is still alive and well to this day, with its most recent release hitting store shelves in April of 2020. In those nearly 30 years of reanimated life, the franchise has birthed 9 mainline entries, 3 remakes, 782 spin-off games, 6 live-action big-budget films, and 4 animated movies. That's without going deep into the novels, comics, and myriad pieces of merchandise that have shambled the aisles of your local toys and collectible stores for the last 2 decades plus. It goes without saying that this History of series cannot possibly give the same level of love and attention to detail to every single title the franchise has spawned, so there are some limitations I have to set. For starters, it's difficult to do a retrospective on a franchise that is still an ongoing, very busy, hot commodity. So, to be clear, this series will cover the first decade of RE's existence. That's 1996 to 2006, for those who are unaware. That's not to say that in the future Resident Evil 5, 6, and 7, and beyond won't be covered somewhere down the line, but they're not in the pipeline at the moment. That's just the way the zombie tumbles, alright? But let's not get ahead of ourselves here and raise questions as to why Nemesis is decked out head to toe in tight black leather, how it's possible for an ordinary woman to carry a rocket launcher and a shotgun at the same time with 0 pockets in her tight-ass jeans, or who the fuck this guy is just yet. There will be plenty of time for all that later. Now, where were we before I so rudely interrupted myself? Oh yeah, the origin of evil and all that good stuff. Decades before Isaac Clarke was stranded on the USG Ishimura, and many moons before Jill Valentine became the master of unlocking, a man by the name of Takuro Fujiwara brought to life a little old game called Sweet Home. Released on December 15th, 1989, exclusively on Nintendo's Famicom system in Japan, Sweet Home is based on the Japanese horror film of the same name. The story centers around 5 filmmakers scouring an abandoned mansion in search of several priceless paintings, which have been hidden inside the house for over 30 years now. Before long, the quintet of ill-prepared protagonists is locked inside the mansion by a ghost who previously lived in the home. Oh, and the mansion is filled with monsters. How nice. Sweet Home is considered by many to be one of the greatest horror games of all time, and its ties to Resident Evil are more than just skin deep. While the first game in the Resident Evil franchise was released in 1996 for the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn, development on the inaugural title began in 1993 and was originally targeted to release on the Super Nintendo. That's according to a Game Informer interview with Koji Oda, who was working on the game at the time. This was back before the name Resident Evil had even been assigned to it, said Oda. The code name for this was literally just horror game. Before an official title was chosen, the game was, for all intents and purposes, a remake of Sweet Home, with the original director Takuro Fujiwara attached as one of the game's producers. In the director's chair this time around was a fairly new to the games industry Shinji Mikami, who had just designed his first big commercial hit, 1993's Aladdin on the Super Nintendo. For the first 6 months of its development, the Sweet Home remake was designed as a first-person horror shooter. The image you're looking at right now is the only surviving piece of concept art from those early stages. Mikami would leave the first-person orientation behind after discovering the 1992 PC game Alone in the Dark, which featured specially placed cameras in each and every environment the sprawling adventure had to offer. Gone were the vibes of Wolfenstein, and in were those of The Shining. By this point, the Super Nintendo iteration of the game was long dead. Takuro Fujiwara's main source of excitement regarding the project was the ability to present his Sweet Home concepts on much more powerful hardware, and thus, Sony's PlayStation was deemed the game's new home. Obviously, the working title, horror game, wasn't going to cut it, and so Biohazard was born. Here's the issue with the Biohazard name, though. You see, in 1992 here in the States, Sega published a space shooter called Biohazard Battle. That's not so bad, right? Surely there can be more than one Biohazard game on the market. The two games aren't even close to the same genre. Either way, whether they could or couldn't acceptably share shelf space, it didn't matter. Biohazard, the American punk metal band, were 6 albums deep into their career and owned the copyright to the name. The game's publisher, Capcom, only settled on the Resident Evil name after sending their director of communications, Chris Kramer, on an overnight retreat in an allegedly haunted house. Kramer reported that he was unable to sleep through the night due to what he deemed to be supernatural events occurring in the home, and that it was his belief that evil still lived there. I'm just kidding. They held a company-wide naming contest and Resident Evil was the last title standing. Wouldn't that be really fucked up if they made that dude sleep in a haunted house, though? It'd be a cool story. The mid-90s were a major turning point in the evolution of the video game industry. The machines were becoming more powerful, which led to better looking and sounding games. There may be no better example of this evolution anywhere in the timeline than March of 1996, and I'm going to tell you why. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars is considered, to this day, to be a fantastic game. This Super Nintendo title was the very first role-playing game to use the Mario license. It looks and sounds incredible. 11 short days later, Kirby Superstar was released on the same console. These beautiful colors and infectious soundtracks superpowered the gameplay from level to level, creating another SNES masterpiece that stands the test of time. 16-bit games had never looked or sounded better at this point, with designers and developers truly mastering the art of harnessing every ounce of power they could pull from the consoles they were creating for. One day later, Resident Evil was released for the Sony PlayStation, and this is how the game begins.
Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten.
This was fucking terrifying the first time you saw it. This game came out the day after Kirby Superstar. You just finished the level with the goddamn pretty rainbow bird, and now people's throats are getting torn out by zombified Dobermans? Real people in real life because this shit looks like a movie? Jesus Christ. This is where my journey with Resident Evil began. I was at my friend Tim's house. This was a little after the game's release. I'd imagine it was mid-1997 at this point. That would place me at 6.5 years old, if you were wondering. I distinctly remember Tim telling me, this game is like a movie. There are real people in it. But I didn't have any clue what the hell that meant. All I really knew was that the game was going to be spooky based on the cover art, so we closed the blinds and made the room as dark as possible to really lose ourselves in the atmosphere. The second that fucking dog started tackling people and murdering them, we popped up, reopened the blinds, and invited as much sunlight into the room as possible. No zombie dogs were going to get us, not as long as it's still bright outside. Isn't that weird how your brain works as a kid? It's not dark anymore, I'm safe. Kids have a strange concept of safety. The introduction wraps with the surviving members of the STARS team seeking refuge inside a nearby mansion, and this is where the mood lightened a little bit.
What a mansion!
Captain Wesker, where's Chris?
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
Look, we were still afraid. That intro shook us pretty good, but the voice acting in this very first cutscene settled us down a bit. Nobody speaks like this. Tim and I knew this voice acting was terrible even at 6 and 7 years old.
Okay, let me handle this.
We were still laughing our way into the dining room, still giggling and mocking our character's partner, Barry Burton, as he delivered lines stiffer than a right hand from Roddy Piper.
Oh, no!
The fear was gone. We had settled in. We were tough, goddammit. That's when we ventured our character out into the hallway in search of more of our STARS teammates. It was at this point that we screamed, paused the game, and left the room to go outside. I'm not kidding. We didn't even know how to play the game yet. We'd already gotten scared, recovered, and goofed on the shitty voice acting before being frightened out of the room for the rest of the day. It may not seem like much now, it might feel like I'm being dramatic, but let me tell you, this was the real deal. We were 6 and 7 years old, we shouldn't even been playing this game. We were so impressed by the full motion video opening that we weren't even paying close attention to the story that was being told. In a nutshell, the plot is this. It's the summer of 1998 in the midwestern town of Raccoon City. Several bizarre murders take place. I don't mean bizarre as in like some guy exploded for no reason. I mean like mutilated bodies were discovered with what appeared to be human teeth marks from head to toe. Obviously, this isn't normal, so the standard city police aren't the ones put on the job. That card would be drawn by the STARS outfit. The first group, Bravo Team, head into the area and shortly thereafter cease communications. Alpha Team are sent in to find out what the hell happened, discover the wreckage of their comrade's helicopter, and that's when the dogs strike. Brad Vickers, the pilot for Alpha Team, loses his shit upon witnessing his partner Joseph being torn to pieces and flies the hell out of the danger zone. This leaves the remaining Alpha Team members Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and our fearless leader Albert Wesker stranded, with the aforementioned mansion as the only safety from the dangers in the woods. But the mansion, though beautiful from the outside, did not hold the solace they so desperately desired. Resident Evil offers the player two ways to experience the story. You can go with Jill Valentine, who has the ability to carry more items at once due to her larger inventory space, or Chris Redfield, who can withstand much more damage from enemies before dying. There's a give and take here, but I always saw Jill as the way to play. Taking damage from enemies is something I can prevent if I use my head, but inventory space is something I can't make up for through skill if I choose Chris. So for me, it always was and still is a Jill Valentine mission. It's not just a variation in difficulty though. Your choice in protagonist has a fairly large impact on the story as well. Going with Chris leads to a partnership with the surviving Bravo Team medic, Rebecca Chambers, whereas Jill's run-ins are with STARS teammate, Barry Burton. Regardless of your choice in character, the game, for all intents and purposes, feels the same. While the over-the-shoulder point of view would be popularized by Resident Evil 4 nearly 10 years later, here in the original, the cameras are placed in predetermined locations, a feature inspired by Alone in the Dark, as we touched on earlier. These fixed cameras, as they've come to be known, add a level of control to the developers in terms of presenting a scenario. It forces the player to take note of each and every aspect of their surroundings, as the pre-rendered backgrounds are arguably the star of the show in the original Resident Evil. It's easy to be confident heading into a room when you can see the bad guys in the distance, but opening a door and hearing the shambling of the undead somewhere off camera is undeniably more frightening. Where are they? Are they close enough to be a problem? How many of them are out there? The perspective and presentation being out of our hands adds an extra layer of fear, as do the less than perfectly fluid controls. For example, let's look at a game like Dark Souls 3. The challenges presented to us seem insurmountable, but through precise hitboxes and a control scheme that is pinpoint accurate, there's no enemy we can't overcome. Back in the 1996 land of Resident Evil, though, there's no rolling, there's no parrying, no mixing of strong and weak attacks. Our character moves like a marble statue, and if you didn't know, marble is heavy as fuck. We can't walk and shoot at the same time, and due to the fixed cameras, we don't have sights to aim down in order to line up a shot. This means that each and every round that leaves our chamber has to be launched from a safe distance and executed to the best of our abilities, based on the perspective at hand. This might sound like a pain in the ass, and I guess it is. I often wonder what it must be like for gamers born much later than I was to attempt to master this antiquated control scheme. For me, though, it's second nature. I speak the language of tank controls clearer than I speak English. It's in my DNA at this point. It's not just the walking and shooting we have to worry about, though. Not every door we approach is welcoming us with open arms. A good deal of these bastards are locked and require specific keys to open them up. Traversing the maze-like halls of this gigantic mansion can be overwhelming at first, but once you've found a map, or at least commit the layout of each floor to memory, the horizons seem to broaden. Finding a new key and unlocking a door you've attempted to open 3 times in the past is always met with a feeling of, ha! The locked doors are an obstacle, but the puzzles are on another level entirely. There's one specific room tucked all the way at the end of a hall. Once inside, we're greeted with an art gallery. Crows sit atop the lighting rig, squawking warnings down to the player. This puzzle requires the player to use the context clues provided and flip the switches below the paintings in the order of human evolution. Failure results in the crows springing to action and feverishly attacking the player. This puzzle is simple in hindsight. Flip the switches from baby to grandpa. Got it. But as a 6-year-old, my friends and I didn't get it. We just trial and error style flipped every switch in the room, running in and out of halls like idiots every time we went in the wrong order. It pays to soak in the environment and actually follow these directions. Who would have thought? Not every puzzle in the game comes with a not-so-subtle, hey asshole, here's what you're supposed to do guide though. Take this room, one of the first rooms you enter early in the game. We've got a bar, a nice piano, and that's it. Alright, should we leave? Nope. What you want to do is head over to the right, push this discolored shelf out of the way of the good shelf, grab the sheet music, head over to the piano, play Moonlight Sonata to perfection, and watch the hidden door behind you open up. Inside is a statue that houses a golden emblem. You don't want to take this emblem because the door will shut behind you, so ignore this for now. Eventually come across a wooden emblem, bring it back to the secret room, take the golden emblem and replace it with the wooden emblem. Head back to the original dining room, insert the golden emblem into the hollow space. The clock behind you will move and reveal a hole in the wall. Inside the hole is a key to unlock a previously inaccessible door. That's just one example. You never knew what the hell was coming next in this game, and while that may sound frustrating, it was the payoff of figuring it all out that made it all worth it. One of the keys to Resident Evil's horror factor is that it never allows the enemies we're fighting to become normalized. Here's what I mean by that. Have you guys seen the movie Mama? The monster in that movie is scary as shit the first time we see her, then she shows up again, and again, and again. And before you know it, she's on screen for half the fucking film and it kinda just looks silly. Resident Evil establishes early on that the dogs are fast and dangerous. The zombies are common but can be dealt with easily if need be. Then the hunters show up, and these reptilian looking fuckers can take your head off in one swipe. But you're a badass, right? Hunters don't scare you. Good. That's good. Because as the story unfolds, the environments begin to change. We go from the sprawling corridors of the mansion to the guardhouse, to the tunnels, and eventually down below the mansion into the laboratory. Each and every new environment houses new monsters, each more volatile than the next. I'm talking giant tarantulas, eldritch-looking fuckers called chimera, and even bloodthirsty sharks that populate a room filled ass-cheek high with water. This is where one of my favorite little pieces of detail comes into play as well. If you're really paying attention, you'll notice that the zombies strewn about the game are all in different states of decay, and are clothed in outfits appropriate to their location. Inside the mansion, the undead are dressed nicely, as these were the staff employed here. Their skin is noticeably graying as they decompose. But below ground in the laboratory, the slaps of the zombies' bare feet on the cold tile floors can be heard from afar. These zombies are completely naked, and their skin, while ravaged, isn't decaying. That's because these weren't people that were infected by another zombie. These were test subjects that had undergone extensive experimentation. This might be a good place to dig a little deeper into the story. I'm sure some of you are going like, what the hell is he talking about? Let me fill you in. The murders, the investigation, the mansion, we've set the groundwork. Our trek through this gargantuan and bizarre home leads to myriad discoveries, each more damning than the next. For starters, not every member of the original Bravo team is dead. When we encounter Enrico in the tunnels, he makes it clear that this wasn't all just some mysterious accident, and that in fact, one of our own star's compatriots is pulling the strings. Before he can divulge any more details though,
everything was plotted from the start by Umbrella. Ha!
he's shot to death right in front of us. Somebody was listening to our conversation, and they did not want Enrico talking. And at this point, you might finally be wondering, what's the deal with all these monsters? The zombies, the hunters, the sharks, all of it. That's where the experimentation I mentioned earlier comes into play. Experimentation performed secretly by a company called Umbrella. Umbrella, on the surface, was your average mega corporation. They had their hands in a little bit of everything. Health food, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, creating a brand new race of superhumans to eventually take over the entire world, the whole deal. Umbrella Corporation's scientists were working on what they called the T-virus, which, in its perfected state, would transform an average human into a mega-powered and intellectually advanced being. These zombies walking around the halls of this mansion aren't just random undead jabronis. They're the aftermath of the T-virus getting loose before it was finished. An accident in the laboratory led to a complete botch job in containment. The dogs they were testing on, the ones we mentioned earlier, escaped their cages, spread the virus into humans, the zombies we met earlier. With the situation spiraling out of control, Umbrella decided they wanted to keep it quiet. They sent in their own specialized team to fix it, and they failed. With word spreading like wildfire, they had no choice but to call in our STARS team, led by Captain Albert Wesker, who just so happened to be a key member of Umbrella himself. Wesker isn't here to get to the bottom of the grisly murders. He knows exactly what's going on. He's here to contain the issue, make sure none of us come back to tell the tale, and destroy any evidence that might link Umbrella to the murders. The twists, the turns, the swerves, they keep you on your toes throughout the entire ordeal. But if you want to see the full story play out, you better be prepared to battle the bosses that are in your way. Zombies are one thing, but a gigantic venomous snake is another. Wait, I worded that wrong. I meant...
It was a huge snake, and also poisonous. Ugh.
There's the black tiger, aka giant tarantula, Plant 42, which is a T-virus infected overgrown garden weed with a bad attitude, and the ultimate motherfucker, the tyrant. This guy is a few steps closer to the perfect being that Umbrella were trying to create with the T-virus, but obviously, he's not finished yet. His heart is outside of his body. He's uglier than sin. But with all that said, he's as scary as he looks, and he's not to be taken lightly. Resident Evil taught me very early on in life that when I find a ton of ammo lying around in a game, it's probably because I'm gonna need it very soon. It's a blessing and a curse. Honestly, the simple act of even discussing the bosses from the original Resident Evil is enough to send a chill straight up my ass. I think we should take a second to recover and enjoy some of the best voice acting performances this game has to offer.
Joseph!
Wesker is a crazy man.
Whoa! This hall is dangerous.
You are so cruel.
Well, you don't have to worry about anything.
Let's separate again.
Just a moment. I found something. It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
But just take a look at this. Oh my God. I'm going to find out what caused Forrest's death. It looks like he was killed by a crow or something.
You saved me!
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Where on earth have you been? You disappeared from the hall all of a sudden.
Jill, you're here too.
Yes, you're here too?
The game's final act has us underground in the laboratory below the mansion. The abundance and sheer variety of monsters is at its peak down here, and with good reason. As we've already discussed, this is where the outbreak originated. Outside of the enhanced, aka naked, zombies, we've got to keep our eyes peeled for the Chimera, which attach themselves to the ceiling with the hooks at the end of their arms. If the T-virus turns humans into zombies, then what the fuck is this thing? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, when Umbrella's attempts to perfect the enhancement of a common tarantula didn't yield the results they'd hoped, they scrapped their web spinner project and moved on to the Chimera. The origin of this monstrosity isn't very glamorous, to say the least. Umbrella would send agents out in the middle of the night and kidnap women from the streets, forcibly impregnate them with a human and insect hybrid embryo, and hold them captive until they gave birth to the fucking nightmare you see before you. Seriously. I should mention that one of my absolute favorite parts of the game is completely optional and entirely missable. There's a roll of slides that you can find in the lab that, when accessed via the projector, give a much clearer, closer look at the enemies we've encountered. We've looked at them as monsters from the moment we saw them, and to see them on this projector boiled down to the codename pet projects of a group of assholian scientists bent on world domination, it becomes very clear just how fucked up things have gotten in old Raccoon City. The story itself comes to a head when Wesker reveals himself as the man pulling the strings. He's got Barry's family held hostage and has been using him as a pawn the entire game. There are some doozies here as far as bad translations and poor voice acting goes, but long story short, Barry shows up and saves the day, knocking Wesker out cold. Realizing it would be a horrible idea to leave this tyrant creature alive, Barry and Jill attempt to peacefully put it out of its misery. But it doesn't go according to plan.
Damn you!
Now is a great time to have either the bazooka or the Colt Python on you, because it's the first of two tyrant fights. After incapacitating this giant son of a bitch, the story is finally over, right? Wrong. Wesker turns on the self-destruct system inside the mansion, and we've got to get the hell out of here. Brad Vickers, the jerk-off who left us stranded here to begin with, circles back around to make the pickup, but can't do so while the re-emerged tyrant is still alive. So he tosses down a trusty rocket launcher to blow him to bits. With the tyrant dead, the mansion destroyed, and the outbreak seemingly contained, our characters ride home peacefully. There are actually several different endings to the game, depending on who you chose from the start and how you decided to play. As Jill, we can save Chris from his cell in the lab if we follow all the required steps. Barry can either turn on Wesker and rejoin us on the good side, or die inside the mansion if we don't handle our business correctly. As Chris, it's possible to save Rebecca, Jill, Rebecca and Jill, so on and so forth. It's a tale that begs to be retold, and the variety in ending scenarios makes it very easy to jump back into the madness. We've got characters on screen playing out the story in front of our very eyes, but I always felt like there was much more to be learned from the books and diaries that we can find strewn about this mansion. Resident Evil is filled to the brim with memorable moments, but few stand out to me the way the Keeper's Diary did. I'm gonna read this diary to you page by page so you can feel the dread that I felt back in 1996. At night, we played poker with Scott the Guard, Alias, and Steve the Researcher. Steve was really lucky, but I think he was cheating. What a scumbag. Today, a high-ranking researcher asked me to take care of a new monster. It looks like a gorilla without any skin. They told me to feed them live food. When I threw in a pig, they were playing with it, tearing off the pig's legs and pulling out the guts before they actually ate it. Around 5 o'clock this morning, Scott came in and woke me up suddenly. He was wearing a protection suit that looks like a spacesuit. He told me to put one on as well. I heard there was an accident in the basement lab. It's no wonder. Those researchers never rest, even at night. I've been wearing this annoying spacesuit since yesterday. My skin grows musty and feels very itchy. By way of revenge, I didn't feed those dogs today. Now I feel better. I went to the medical room because my back is all swollen and feels itchy. They put a big bandage on my back and the doctor told me I did not need to wear the spacesuit anymore. I guess I can sleep well tonight. When I woke up this morning, I found another blister on my foot. It was annoying and I ended up dragging my foot as I went to the dog's pen. They've been quiet since this morning, which is very unusual. I found that some of them had escaped. I'll be in real trouble if the higher-ups find out. Even though I didn't feel well, I decided to go see Nancy. It's my first day off in a long time, but I was stopped by the guard on the way out. They say the company has ordered that no one leave the grounds. I can't even make a phone call. What kind of joke is this? I heard a researcher who tried to escape from this mansion was shot last night. My entire body feels burning and itchy at night. When I was scratching the swelling on my arm, a lump of rotten flesh dropped off. What the hell is happening to me? Fever gone, but itchy. Hungry, and eat dog. Itchy, itchy Scott King. Ugly face will kill them. Tasty. Itchy. Tasty. To this day, reading those words freaks me out. We just read a first-hand experience of what it's like to turn into one of these zombies. It's not like a switch flips in your brain and all of a sudden it's done. It's drawn-out torture, burning, itching pain, fevers, rotten flesh, and eventually a complete disengagement of cognitive function. It's terrifying. The standout moments don't stop there, though. Who could forget when the game launches into a cutscene in the middle of a seemingly safe room, and we see through the eyes of the hunter stalking us from afar? The son of a bitch opens a door. Doors are for us! They're supposed to keep us safe! Maybe you were more traumatized by discovering former teammate Forrest with his eye plucked out of his head by the crows. I don't blame you. I know each and every one of you who have played this game have come across a typewriter when you didn't have an ink ribbon, or found a key when your inventory was already full. It's infuriating. Resident Evil, as previously stated, hit store shelves in March of 1996. Takuro Fujiwara was quoted as saying he expected the game to do fairly well from a commercial standpoint, selling around 200,000 copies. Director Shinji Mikami was worried that a horror game may not sell well at all. And programmer Yasuhiro Anpo stated that Capcom as a whole didn't see success in Resident Evil's future. They've probably never been so happy to be wrong. The game would go on to sell nearly 5 million copies at retail. The reviews were outstanding. The success of the first Resident Evil title didn't only spawn an entire family tree of sequels, spin-offs, novelizations, films, action figures, and other merchandise. It spearheaded its very own genre. Survival horror exploded in a big way in the late 90s. Clock Tower released at the end of 1996. Parasite Eve premiered in 1998. Silent Hill debuted in 1999. This was the golden age of survival horror, Dan Nans, and I'm proud to have lived through it, even if it scared the shit out of me. Resident Evil is more than just a video game for my friends and I. Resident Evil is forever bonded to my childhood, like the very virus the game is centered around. When I see the Tyrant break out of his experimental housing, I don't see a cutscene from a PS1 game. I see myself, my brother, and my friend Tim standing on the base of the slide Tim had in his backyard. One of us would play the Tyrant, mimicking his every movement, while the other two would portray Barry, Chris, Wesker, or whoever the hell else we had in mind. We'd run around his backyard pretending the side door to his garage was a way into some secret lair. We'd use our toy guns and shoot imaginary zombies that were closing in on us from all sides. Eventually we'd run 2 houses down to where I lived and jump into the pool, or as we pretended it was, the sewer. It was our only escape from the dangers on the streets. The fact of the matter is this: Resident Evil added new layers to our childhood imaginations that we may not otherwise have discovered. But the original Resident Evil's legacy doesn't end in 1996, and no, I'm not talking about Resident Evil Director's Cut, which was a slightly remixed version which came out in 1997 after the sequel had been delayed. I'm talking, of course, about 2002's Resident Evil Remake on the Nintendo GameCube. By the time the end of 2002 rolled around, I was 12 years old. I was older now, smarter, tougher, and definitely not scared of any wimpy video game. Yeah, this cutscene that plays before you even get to the main menu of the GameCube remake scared the shit out of me. It was back. It had all come back to haunt me all over again. The mansion, the fucking zombies, the goddamn sharks. I hated it. I mean, I loved it, but I hated that it scared me all over again. I'm not joking when I say that this game blew us away. Everything we had loved about the original was back. It was bigger, better, scarier. This is how you do a remake. Shinji Mikami, director of the original version, helmed the remake as well. And man oh man does it show. It's funny how Takuro Fujiwara handed Sweet Home over to Mikami, happy to see his creation brought to life on more powerful hardware and be molded into what would become Resident Evil. 6 years later, Mikami would recreate his own baby on more powerful hardware. Like the T-Virus, Resident Evil itself continues to evolve, transform, and spread into new arenas of life. Holy hell, Dan-Dans, that's going to draw us to a close. Thank you for joining me for this, the History of Resident Evil Part 1, The Mansion. Next time out, we're going to head out of the woods and into the more suburban locales of Raccoon City with the History of Resident Evil Part 2, Undead Evolution. Until then, I love you, and I will see you next time.